knew something was wrong when she smirked. But instead of confronting her, I just walked away in that one moment. Everything changed. My best friend, the man I trusted more than anyone, had been sleeping with my wife, and as I watched them exchange vows at his wedding months later, I knew revenge was going to be sweeter than I could ever imagine. I used to believe we had it all. Sophie and I were married for 6 years, living in a modest but cozy apartment, surrounded by friends and laughter. Every morning I kissed her goodbye, with a promise to meet later for dinner. We talked about everything, shared our secrets, laughed about nothing. I didn't know it then, but I'd been living in a bubble, a perfect illusion that I'd helped create. I remember the way Sophie's eyes sparkled when she talked about our future, how she'd curl up next to me on cold nights and read her favorite novels aloud. We had our routine, our rhythm. The quiet intimacy that only years of marriage can create. I thought we were solid, untouchable. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift, subtle, imperceptible changes. And by the time I noticed, it was too late. It started with the late nights. Sophie always worked late, but I'd never questioned it before. She was ambitious, driven. But one evening, when I called her just after 9 p.m. to check in, she seemed off. Her voice was tight, distant, and when she rushed off the phone, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I ignored it. Maybe she was just stressed. But it didn't stop there. Her phone became a fortress. Always face down, always hidden, always vibrating with messages she quickly dismissed. I wasn't the jealous type, so I convinced myself I was being paranoid. But then the perfume. It wasn't the one she wore when we first met. It was a sharp, spicy scent I didn't recognize. I told myself it was nothing. She had to borrow someone's cologne at work, or maybe it was just a new brand. The cracks in our marriage were starting to show, though I couldn't admit it. Sophie stopped initiating conversations about our future, and she wasn't as affectionate anymore. I began to feel like a stranger to her. And then one night I walked into our living room to find Tyler sitting there. He was my best friend. He'd been part of my life since college. Every milestone, every heartbreak, we'd shared it all. But when our eyes met that night, something shifted. Tyler wasn't just sitting there. He was acting too comfortable. Too familiar with her? I couldn't explain it then, but a cold, visceral feeling wrapped around my chest. Something was wrong. And in the pit of my stomach, I knew. I knew that Tyler had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I didn't react right away. That was the first part of my plan. Don't react. Not impulsively. Not emotionally. I had to stay calm. I told myself that whatever was going on, whether it was a flirtation or something deeper, I wouldn't let anger cloud my judgment. Instead, I needed to understand the full scope of their betrayal. Over the next few weeks, I started to gather the pieces. Sophie had become more secretive, sneaking around like I wouldn't notice. Tyler had been texting her constantly. I saw the messages when Sophie left her phone unattended once. Can't wait to see you tonight. We'll make sure no one else finds out. I could feel my blood boil, but I didn't act. Not yet. I'd spent years studying human behavior. I knew how to play this game. So I took a step back, observing. I began feeding Tyler information about Sophie's supposed work trips, leading him to believe I was distracted and trusting. I started making subtle changes, like leaving random objects at the house, things that would make Sophie uncomfortable but wouldn't be obvious. A lock of hair, a jacket Tyler had left behind, a stray lipstick. Little things. The plan wasn't about explosive confrontation. It was about manipulation. I had to turn Tyler and Sophie's lives into a series of small, irreversible mistakes. Then when everything seemed ready, I laid the final piece. I knew Sophie and Tyler were getting closer, closer than they'd ever been. I invited Tyler to a get-together, a casual gathering with a few of our mutual friends. But I also made sure to invite a few key people People who had a lot to lose professionally. Sophie was always on top of her game, but I knew she had a few secrets in her past, secrets she'd worked hard to keep buried. It wasn't about ruining her. It was about exposing the truth. All of it. It was at Tyler's wedding where everything fell apart. He'd been in a relationship with someone else, someone he was supposed to marry, but I knew that when I pulled the strings, the truth would surface. The ceremony was beautiful, typical of the rich, perfect illusion Tyler had always wanted to portray. He'd been boasting about it for months, acting like his life was perfect. The smug grin he wore when he caught my eye made me nauseous. Sophie stood beside him as one of his bridesmaids, her nervous smile hiding her guilt during the reception. When the champagne flowed, I made my move. I found the perfect moment, when Tyler and Sophie were laughing together, lost in their own world. I pulled aside one of his friends, a key player who had witnessed everything: Tyler's late-night texts to Sophie, the clandestine meetings, the stolen moments. I told him everything. The moment Tyler took his vows, I knew I had them both. Sophie's face went pale as she caught my eye. It was as if she knew the truth had been uncovered. Tyler, smug and confident, turned to me for approval, as if nothing had changed. I smiled, but it wasn't a smile of camaraderie. It was a smile that made him pause, a smile that slowly turned into a smirk on my part. Then, just as the ceremony reached its peak, I made a call. It wasn't to the police, it was to HR. Sophie's old company had been dealing with rumors about her involvement in some questionable practices. Rumors I had uncovered. I had her old supervisor on the line, ready to drop everything I'd been digging for months. The wedding atmosphere cracked like glass. The whispers started, and by the time the reception began, Sophie and Tyler's professional lives were spiraling. What followed was an avalanche. Tyler lost his job due to misconduct, and Sophie, unable to protect her reputation, was swiftly removed from her role as well. Their social media attempts to twist the narrative backfired. Instead of sympathy, they faced ridicule. But what made it sweeter wasn't their downfall, it was watching them implode on their own. Watching them struggle, as the consequences of their actions unraveled their lives. The months that followed weren't easy. I wasn't untouched by the chaos, but I knew one thing: I had taken control of my narrative. I didn't need to scream or cry. I simply let their actions speak, louder than any confrontation could have. I moved on. It wasn't a clean break, it rarely is, but I found my footing again. Sophie and Tyler tried to smear my name, but it didn't work. People saw the truth, and that was all I needed. A few months later, I met Sarah. She wasn't a perfect replacement for Sophie, I wasn't looking for one. But there was something different about Sarah. She understood my pain, my journey. And slowly with her I began to trust again. Revenge hadn't brought me peace. Learning to move forward did. It taught me that the best form of justice is often the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't seek acknowledgement, just a resolution. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own life. If you've ever been hurt, betrayed, or manipulated, know that the truth always finds its way out. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that. Revenge isn't always loud, it's often silent and precise.